Welcome back to Southeast Asia Radio. Today we'll cover microplastic intake in Southeast Asia and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's surprise address to Southeast Asian leaders in Singapore.
We'll also discuss U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's visit to Cambodia and the latest row between the Philippines and China in the South China Sea. I'm Lauren Mai.
And I'm Japhet and Lauren. Today is June 13th, 2024. On this week's conversation,
Thailand is in the same holding pattern, which means that, you could pick any juncture over the last 2 decades, and Thailand is still kind of unsettled, out of sync. So sometimes you look at Thailand, there's a government, but maybe one way is that the judiciary rules Thailand, not govern Thailand day to day, but rules Thailand by preventing governments that it does not like from taking office or from staying in office.
Greg and Elina were joined by Thitinan Pongsudhirak to discuss the latest developments in Thailand. Before that, let's start with our headlines.
Hey, Japhet, how many credit cards do you own?
That's a really weird question.
Well, if you take the 3 of them and you put them together, did you know that that's how much microplastic the average person in Indonesia consumes every month?
Oh, that's appetizing, I guess. Tell me more.
A recent study from the Environmental Science and Technology Journal finds that Southeast Asian countries have the highest per capita intake of microplastics amongst 109 countries studied. Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam topped the list.
The study said that Indonesians eat about 15 grams of microplastics per month, largely from ingesting seafood with plastic particulates.
For reference, people in the US on average ingest about a sixth of this, at 2.4 grams a month or half of a credit card. The report is certainly raising concerns about mismanaged plastic waste runoffs from landfills or open dumping in Southeast Asia.
This is a conversation that Malaysia is having now, especially after recent reports show that 300 tons of garbage, mostly plastic containers and plastic bags, were collected from just 2 rivers in Johor last year.
Such river cleanups are the right step forward. The researchers say that a 90% reduction in aquatic plastic debris could also have microplastic consumption in Southeast Asia.
That sounds great. Let's hope these efforts continue then. For our next story, we're looking at the unexpected appearance of Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky at the Shangri-La Dialogue hosted in Singapore 2 weeks ago.
During the defense summit, the president vouched for international support for its ongoing war with Russia, asking ASEAN leaders to join in an upcoming global peace summit in Switzerland. So far on the agenda, country representatives are set to discuss nuclear security, food security, and the return of Ukrainian children as its foremost priorities.
Nearly 90 countries have confirmed their attendance at the summit. However, China refused to take part as Russia was not invited to the conference.
Concerns over China's growing support for Russia in the war has led Ukraine to intensify its diplomatic efforts with other countries in Asia-Pacific.
Following Zelensky's speech in the Security Forum, the Russian embassy in Singapore urged ASEAN countries to not participate in the peace summit.
Despite Russia's warnings, Zelensky's visit to Southeast Asia seems to have borne fruit. Singapore confirmed to send representatives to the summit. Then, in an unannounced trip to Manila, Zelensky met with Philippine President Bongbong Marcos, who announced the Philippines would also take part in the summit.
Interestingly, President Marcos's rhetoric about the war has changed drastically over the past 2 years. Previously, he held a neutral stance toward the war when running for office. Now, he's advocating for Ukraine's war efforts and calling Ukraine's situation incredibly critical.
Analysts attribute such changes to similar strategic priorities between Ukraine and the Philippines. Both countries may feel like they are in similar positions given their ongoing territorial disputes, Ukraine with Russia and the Philippines with China amid the heightening tensions in the South China Sea.
Let's keep an eye on how things unfold at the peace summit scheduled for this weekend.
Meanwhile, another high-level official was also busy after the Shangri-La Dialogue. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin visited Cambodia to discuss ways to strengthen defense ties in support of regional peace and security.
Right. For our next story, we're breaking down the major takeaways from Austin's meeting with Cambodia's Prime Minister and Defense Minister.
But before we begin, let's discuss why Austin chose to visit Cambodia in the first place.
Good idea. The U.S. is increasingly concerned about China's influence in Cambodia. Notably, Chinese warships have been docked in Cambodia for the past 6 months at a new pier built with Chinese funding.
Though Cambodian officials state that the warships are there for joint military drills, analysts worry that the pier could serve as a new outpost for the Chinese Navy on the Gulf of Thailand.
So, in the context of these concerns, Secretary Austin visited Cambodia for the second time as Secretary of Defense.
This also marks the first time he's met Prime Minister Hun Manet since he took over the premiership from his father.
The officials discussed opportunities to strengthen the US-Cambodia bilateral defense relationship. This included talks of resuming of military training exchanges, demining training, and Cambodian participation in US military education programs.
The two sides also expressed interest in continuing to discuss issues between their respective defense establishments.
Though there weren't any significant deliverables and achievements from the meetings, it set an overall positive tone for U.S. engagement with Cambodia's new leadership.
That's right. Unfortunately, on a less positive note, we're looking at the latest row between the Philippines and China for our final story today. Tensions are again heightening between the two countries over the contentious South China Sea.
Last Friday, the Philippine Coast Guard accused its Chinese counterpart of blocking a sick member of their armed forces from seeking a medical evacuation in the South China Sea region. A Filipino spokesperson described the incident as, quote, barbaric and inhumane, end quote, involving dangerous maneuvers and Chinese vessels intentionally ramming the Philippines Navy boat.
The confrontation involved a contingent of Filipino Marines guarding the BRP Sierra Madre, a grounded vessel at the Second Thomas Shoal that has witnessed multiple Sino-Philippine confrontations.
While Chinese officials were notified of the operation's medical nature, members of the Philippine Coast Guard and Navy were blocked from entering the Philippines municipality of Palawan by Chinese vessels.
In response to the Philippine Coast Guard's accusation, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning conceded to the evacuation of personnel. However, she further claimed that such missions should not be operated with the motive of permanently occupying the Second Thomas Shoal.
The recent confrontation occurs against the backdrop of multiple clashes between the Philippines and China, centered around competing claims over the South China Sea. While an international court rejected China's claims over Manila's exclusive economic zone, the decision was rejected by China, who continues to police the area and accuse countries of territorial encroachment.
In fact, a similar confrontation occurred recently surrounding the transportation of food packets in the disputed region.
Oh, really? Could you tell me a little more?
Of course. Last Tuesday, a Philippine military chief accused Chinese Coast Guards of seizing food packets delivered by plane to Filipino Navy personnel. While the food packets were later dumped into the sea, it was suspected that Chinese officials believed that the deliveries were construction materials meant to reinforce the territorial outpost of the Sierra Madre.
That's definitely a worrying development. As confrontations between the two countries continue to escalate, questions remain on how the Philippines plans to assert itself against China's increasing acts of aggression.
You can read more about Marcos's response to China's increasing aggression in the South China Sea on the latest on Southeast Asia, in which I dive into ASEAN's presence at the 21st Shangri-La Dialogue. And those are the headlines. Did we miss anything? Be sure to write us about the topics you're interested in at scaradio@csis.org, and we'll be happy to cover more of them.
We're also calling for questions from you. Greg and Elina will host our upcoming Southeast Asia Radio special anniversary episode, and they'll answer all your questions. Send them through email or DM on any of our social media accounts.
Looking forward to hearing from you all. Coming up, Greg and Elina's conversation with Thitinan Pongsudhirak. Stay tuned.
Hey everybody, Greg here. Before we get to the conversation with Thitinan Pongsudhirak, you're going to hear a few times us make reference to the expectation that by the time this airs, we will know the results of some of the cases that we talk about, especially the dissolution case against the Move Forward Party, which won the most votes in the election last year but was blocked from taking power. Well, that didn't happen. We don't have a ruling yet, but we do now know when it will happen. So on June 12th, which is yesterday for those of you listening the day this comes out, we had the first hearing in that case. And on June 19th, the Constitutional Court of Thailand is expected to issue its ruling, whether or not the Move Forward Party will be dissolved. We also have another case that we didn't know was coming at the time of us recording this, which was another lèse majesté case filed against former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra, who's also the patron of the ruling Pheu Thai party. That hearing is expected to take place on June 18th and couldn't see Thaksin imprisoned. Okay, with that, enjoy the conversation. Welcome back to another episode of Southeast Asia Radio listeners. Today I am joined again by co-host Elina Noor. Elina was unable to join us on the last episode on Vietnam. I should note that the last episode was recorded a day ago because of the time machine of podcast editing. So Elina was busy yesterday, and here she is to join us again today. Hey, Elina.
Ta-da! Hey, Greg.
And today, Elina and I are joined by Thitinan Pongsudhirak with Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok. Thitinan is probably the foremost commentator on Thai politics and foreign policy, at least for those of us in the U.S. who benefit constantly from Thitinan's wisdom. So, Thitinan, thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure. It gives me no pleasure to talk about Thailand in recent years. But when there's no news, it's good news. So when you hear from me, it means something probably not good.
So we had you on the podcast, I think 6 months ago in the fall, but I wasn't able to join that one. So as far as I'm concerned, this is your first time joining Southeast Asia Radio. You spoke to Elina.
Wait a second.
Yeah, it doesn't count if I wasn't there. I have no memory of it. Yeah, very Greg-centric on my end. So we had you on to talk about the outcomes of Thailand's election last year and the jockeying to form a ruling coalition, which eventually came out with the Puatai-led coalition of Prime Minister Seta Thavisin. So today we've got you on for an update on politics, and why don't we start with the most recent developments. Now, we're recording this on May 23rd, so probably a full 3 weeks before this comes out. So, I mean, I'll put it out there for all the listeners. A lot could change the next 3 weeks. If anything radical changes, you'll probably hear a preface before this episode letting you know that. But where we sit now, the latest is that we had the Constitutional Court agree to take up a case filed by 40 members of the Senate calling for Prime Minister Seta to be thrown out of office for violating the Constitution because in a recent cabinet reshuffle, he had added a minister in the Prime Minister's office who had previously been convicted of a crime. And those convicted of a crime, as I understand it, are barred by the Constitution from serving as ministers. So, first, did I mess any of that up? And second, what do you think is going to happen as a result of this case?
Well, it tells us that Thailand is in the same holding pattern, which means that, you could pick any juncture over the last 2 decades, and Thailand is still kind of unsettled, out of sync. So sometimes you look at Thailand, there's a government, but maybe one way is that the judiciary rules Thailand, not govern Thailand day to day, but rules Thailand by preventing governments that it does not like from taking office, or from staying in office. So this latest drama has to do with a Thaksin loyalist who was appointed as a payback to the cabinet in a very junior role as a minister attached to the PM's office, Prime Minister's office. That's not a big portfolio, but it was kind of a payback for him to be a minister because he was a Thaksin bagman lawyer back in 2008. He tried to bribe the judges in Thaksin's favor, and he failed. Of course, it was exposed. He actually was convicted and went to jail for 6 months, along with 2 associates. So you could say that, he served his time. And there was a conviction. And now, because he has been appointed to the cabinet, after vetting, by the way, scrutiny by the Council of State, by the police, by, these various bodies to make sure that all the cabinet members were legitimate. So, he passed all the vetting. But now, retroactively, the Constitutional Court, because of the Senate, there are 40 senators who petitioned the Constitutional Court to look into this because of the apparent violation of the Constitution. Listeners should know that, Thai Constitution has this ethical, moral grounds. Article 160 says you have to be empirically honest in empirical terms. And then you also have to have ethical standards. And because he was convicted and jailed, Seta, as a prime minister, should not have appointed him to the cabinet. And therefore, this is a violation of the Constitution. Therefore, Pichit already has resigned, by the way. But that may not be enough. The Constitutional Court went halfway by saying that Seta does not have to be suspended, but he has to come up with a defense within 15 days. And he could end up being expelled from office from this alleged misconduct violation of the Constitution. This is just one episode, Greg and Elina, just one small episode, I think. But, it could end up with a big outcome. The Prime Minister could be ousted from office. It only takes one individual, one Thai adult, to go and file a charge with the Constitutional Court or Election Commission of fraud. So Move Forward, the charge against Move Forward was that because it campaigned on amending the Last Majestic law, therefore it was tantamount to overthrowing Thailand's democratic system with the king as head of state. Now, Move Forward has not done anything except campaign. Right? It went to the voters and say, if you choose us, we have a lot of reforms. We want to reform the economy, society, the military, the monarchy is one of them. But that charge alone has sidelined, relegated the Move Forward to the opposition, and Move Forward will most likely be dissolved again. Now, the dissolution of big parties in Thai politics is a recurring pattern, and it means that democratic institutions are prevented, stymied, undermined prevented from taking office, from strengthening, from running Thailand, because the judiciary makes that happen, ensures that the threats are put away. So move forward by trying to reform the military and the monarchy has been charged by an individual that filed a charge saying that the Move Forward Party and also its leader, Pita Limcharanat, who in other countries would be Prime Minister of Thailand. But in Thailand, he and his party now are in oppositions, and the Constitutional Court already ruled 9-0 unanimously that the party did violate the Constitution by campaigning to revise the lèse-majesté law against royal criticism. And this could result, and most likely will result, in the dissolution of Move Forward Party. So even the biggest winning party is sidelined and it's going to be dissolved. But even Sethar Thavisin, the Prime Minister of Pheu Thai Party, which made a deal with the conservative establishment, bringing Thaksin back, allowing Thaksin to come back on August 22nd, 2023, the same day Sethar became Prime Minister. This was a super deal in Thailand that reduced Thaksin's jail sentence on corruption by a royal pardon from 8 years to 1 year. And he did not have to serve a day in jail because he was hospitalized and then now he's out on parole. So all of this is to say that Thailand is not run by elected representatives, political parties. It's ruled by judiciary, constitutional court, election commission, and the constitution of 2017 set up, inspired by the military coup in 2014. And we will see different episodes coming up. You're going to have a lot of charades, shenanigans, power plays in Thai politics, all the machinations, but they derive and they end up within this structure of the constitution written after the coup in 2014.
That's quite a comprehensive picture you've painted for us, Thitinan. It's almost like there's no need to ask any more questions.
All right, thank you for tuning into this episode of Southeast Asia Radio.
That's right.
I think there's a lot more beyond that. The implication from that, Thailand is out of commission in the region. So my benchmark for autocracy, democracy in Southeast Asia is that when you have an election, the losers must accept the result. If the losers don't accept the result, you will never have a political settlement and stability to move ahead. And this is really the Thailand story since 2005. The elites, the military, the monarchy, the judiciary, the senior sections of the bureaucracy, the big business conglomerates, which are acting now like an oligopoly, they don't want Thailand to move forward because if it does, it's going to engender and require reforms and modernization that undermine their interests. So in a way, if this doesn't change, if Thailand does not have a course correction, we could see more signs of political decay, economic stagnation, and that's not good for Thailand, but it's also not good for Southeast Asia and ASEAN.
Now, you have laid all the reasons for why Thailand is in a funk. Just to be devil's advocate, some would say that countries should have an active judiciary, and Thailand's judiciary happens to be very active. And in a way, it has all the trappings or apparent functionings of a democracy. And yet you've argued very forcefully that Thailand is not quite the democracy that perhaps many Thais would like for it to be. How do you unstick this funk, if that's even an accurate metaphor? But basically, how do you move forward? We have a case that is going to be decided by the time the airing of this recording, possibly in a few days, on the future of Move Forward. How do we avoid a repeat of this cycle?
Well, you can look at the agenda that Move Forward has come up with for Thailand to move forward. It's not about the party move forward. It's about the agenda. It's about reform and modernization. I think that Thailand clearly now has a system that was cultivated, that came into place during the Cold War. The power resides with the traditional institutions, military, monarchy, judiciary, bureaucracy, not with political parties, elected representatives, parliament, constitution. So to get out of this straitjacket, to kind of unleash the Thailand that we know that could work, that could move forward and unlock its potential, we need reform and modernization in Thailand. That is a big proposition. It's much easier said than done. I think there are a lot of interests at stake, financial, business, economic interests. There's a lot of power to be reconfigured. which means that the political parties cannot be dissolved like this. We've had dissolutions of the big winning parties in 2007, 2008, 2020 with the Move Forward, 2019 with Thai Raksa Chat, and we'll have again in 2024 with the Move Forward Party. So getting out of this means that there has to be reform. And we saw in 2020 there were protests by young people who voted for the Future Forward Party for reform and modernization of the monarchy in particular, but they were put down and persecuted. And I don't see the reform drive manifesting at this stage. I think that the big question here, Elina and Greg, is how much can Thai people take? Sometimes it could be that, Thai people will have a limitless, no ceiling to their tolerance. And if that is the case, Thailand will end up being kind of a semi-autocratic country for the long term. And I think that listeners should not be fooled by these trappings of democratic system, elections, political parties, constitution, parliament, because the elections don't really count ultimately when the big parties, the winning parties, are dissolved, have been dissolved systematically time and again. So there's no two ways about it. There's no other way, any other way except to see some kind of reform modernizations. I think that if we have a good day, there could be some kind of compromise whereby there will be self-enlightened interest for reform from the military, from the monarchy, the judiciary. It would have to end up with a new constitution. So that's why you can look for reform and modernization to take place. There has to be a new constitution drafted by people's representatives, by public accountability, public legitimacy, not like this constitution of 2017, which was written by a military-appointed committee. And that's where we can look for reform modernization. Other ways, we can look at legal reforms. We can look at the ways that the lèse-majesté law is implemented, enforced. It's very draconian. A lot of young people, there have been over 100 persecutions. There's some young people in jail now without bail. We have to see a different kind of role of the monarchy and the military in Thai politics. And that's where it really boils down to. Everything boils down to the role of the monarchy, the military in Thailand's new constitutional order. In order for Thailand to have political stability, political effectiveness, and for Thailand to move on and unleash the potential and the talent that it has, and taking its place within ASEAN, playing its role in the region between US and China, Thailand on a good day can be a middle power doing all of that.
Thitinan, it strikes me that this seems self-destructive on the part of the military, the Palang Pracharat Party, and other conservative parts of the current ruling coalition. They had gotten their way, right? Move Forward was blocked from forming a government. Pheu Thai was allowed to form a government with the military-aligned and conservative parties as part of the government, as a kind of permanent sword of Damocles to make sure that they didn't step out of line. Move Forward could have served as a loyal opposition in parliament. They were able to go out and say, look, yes, Pita and Move Forward didn't get to form a government, but the current coalition does represent parties that won the majority of the vote. And like a lot of Westminster parliamentary systems around the world, the party that wins a plurality of votes doesn't always get to form government. That was good enough. It was good enough for the international community. It was good enough for the U.S. I think there was a real eagerness to embrace Thailand again after 10 years of political dysfunction and strained relations. So the effort now to disqualify Move Forward, setting aside the potential that Sethai himself actually gets thrown at most, but the decision to not just keep Move Forward from taking power, but actually disband the party again and risk another cycle of political instability, it seems very confusing from Washington and very frustrating. Why not, if you're in the conservative establishment, just take the win?
Yeah, I think that outside, abroad, Thailand has a lot of friends, not just Washington, but you can also say Tokyo, Brussels, London. A lot of countries want to see Thailand move forward because Thailand has a role to play. And Thailand is significant on a map, in history, in the geostrategic canvas. It has a role that if it plays its role, it can make a difference in its own way in geopolitics, geoeconomics, all the tensions we see, US-China, and the big questions. So that role is being forfeited because of the internal wrangling, squabbling. I think Drake at home here in the country, despite our friends' perceptions and goodwill abroad, I think there's a big fundamental fight for survival. I think that we have seen kind of a restoration of absolutism, of military and monarchy, reassertion, restoration, restored to the apex of socio-political economic order. And that means that it's sacrosanct. And that means that the move forward agenda of reform, of modernization is seen by the conservative royalist establishment as an existential threat. Now, move forward, I think, has tried to back off a little bit. I mean, they don't have to reform the monarchy right away. They can back off and, the military. And I think that they have shown some willingness to negotiate, to deal, to compromise, to take their time, not to do everything overnight. But I think that the conservative establishment feel very threatened. They feel very insecure about the democratic outcome after last year's elections. It's not about the party move forward. The party after dissolution will have a new name. But it's about the agenda. And that agenda is what Thailand needs. It needs to tackle monopolies. It needs to decentralize, devolve power. It needs to reform the military. I mean, we have a military with 1,400 generals. The U.S. has 1/3 of that, even, if at all, with a much bigger armed forces. And, we have a conscription from the Cold War era. The military's budget is not transparent and accountable. Weapons procurement is very murky, opaque. And then you have the monarchy, which is, I think that's ultimately the role of the monarchy in Thailand's constitutional order, which requires a new constitution. Now, this is really where the situation is stuck. So I don't see, I had to say this, I would like to say otherwise. I just don't see in the foreseeable future mechanisms and ways forward that can come up with this kind of compromise. I hope it will happen, but what we're seeing is the other way. No compromise, just doubling down, tripling down from the conservative establishment.
So I'm usually the dour cynic, but I don't want us to end on that note. And assuming the reform steps, the reform agenda can actually come to fruition at some point in time, whether it's 5, 15, 50 years. In a parallel universe, if all that happened, what would the nature of a renewed, reinvigorated Thailand be in the region?
Well, it would have to include enough with the convergence of enabling factors, enabling conditions. So one is certainly the role of the monarchy, the monarch in particular, the role of military. I think big business would have to see that in the longer term, ultimately, it's better for the pie of Thailand's economy to grow steadily, to grow with promising prospects, rather than to diminish and plateau. For big business oligopolies, the bigger the pie, the better for them. The way they see it now is that the small pie that's not growing is okay because they get to eat most of it. And then, the young people, the electorate, I think they have to be more active, informed, and more assertive. We see young people assertive. And, the demographics, a good omen, Elina. Younger people coming up, voting all the time, every election, eventually there'll be a lot of them. My concern for them would be co-optation. If they get co-opted, persecuted, we already see, but co-optation could also make them part of the establishment. This we don't know. We also have, eventually, we will have a royal succession. I think that's also a window whereby Thailand can kind of have a window of compromise for modernization, for reform. So it's not doom and gloom. I think that there are different windows of progress, of reform that can converge at a certain juncture with enabling conditions that can release Thailand from this straitjacket that we've seen since 2014. And it goes back to even earlier, back to the Cold War, where the conservative establishment was set up.
I think we're going to have to leave it there. I suspect that by the time this episode airs, we're going to have some questions raised during this episode answered, and perhaps in ways that are not satisfactory. But Thitinan, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Elina, thanks for coming back after an unforgivable absence from the last episode. And thanks all of you for listening. We'll be back in another 2 weeks with the next episode of Southeast Asia Radio.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of Southeast Asia Radio. Feel free to write us with any comments, questions, or feedback at searadio@csis.org. We'll get back to you.
Do us a favor and subscribe and give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever streaming platform that you listen to us on. Tell your friends about us.
Marla Hiller is our producer, and our interns are Tappy Lung, Zhang Pham, and Amelie De Leon. Our co-hosts today were Greg Poling and Elina Noor. My name is Japhet Kitsan.
And I'm Lauren Mai.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks for another episode of Southeast Asia Radio.